Today's lesson will be on the resurrection. The resurrection is the foundation of our faith. Jesus raised from the dead on the first day of the week, which is a Sunday, and that is the day that we celebrate Mass and celebrate Easter, the resurrection of Christ, each and every Sunday. The Gospel accounts tell us that Mary Magdalene is among the first, and in fact the first, to encounter the empty tomb, and she is known as the apostle to the apostles because she is instructed to tell the rest of the disciples or apostles that the tomb is empty and bring this news of great joy and victory to the others. Now, Mary does not initially recognize Jesus. It's not until Jesus calls her by name that she calls to him Rabboni, or teacher. And I think it's this intimacy, this relationship that they've had that really is being highlighted here. Jesus' resurrected body apparently must be a little different. It operates differently. People don't seem to recognize him at first, but when she is called by name, she recognizes Jesus. So this is something that we can take away from the story, is that Jesus calls us each by name and invites us into relationship with him. Another interesting thing to note here is that God uses women to be his first witnesses to the resurrection and to carry this news of great joy and victory to the other apostles. And at that time, the testimony of women would have been seen as not authoritative. So it's interesting how God again uses the unlikely people to carry his message of salvation. Jesus, in fact, appears to many others, and we won't cover all of those in our look at the resurrection. But another story I would like to focus on is when Jesus appears to two of his disciples on the road to Emmaus. And what happens at Emmaus is what happens, in fact, at Mass every Sunday and really every day. When Jesus encounters these two disciples, they are feeling down and out and dejected and even full of despair, as this man, Jesus, who they looked to as the Messiah, had just been crucified and buried. But now this risen Jesus is with them and walking with them, and they don't recognize him initially, just like Mary didn't recognize Jesus in his risen body initially. And Jesus is explaining to them how all the Old Testament scriptures point to him and to the fact that he was going to offer himself as a sacrifice for everyone. And then what happens is they enter a home, and the disciples and Jesus share a meal together. And you'll see in that picture in the bottom right corner, Jesus takes the bread, he blesses it, and he breaks it. Words that should sound familiar, words that he uttered at the Last Supper, the same words that are proclaimed in the Mass that we still celebrate even today. And it's when Jesus broke the bread and shared it with these disciples that they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. So obviously Jesus is having a Eucharist moment here. That they recognized him in that moment is very significant. So again, Jesus appears to his disciples numerous times, and before he ascends into heaven, the event we know as the Ascension, Jesus commissions his apostles to go into all the world and make disciples, teach them to obey everything that I have taught you, baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And this has come to be known as the Great Commission, which we find in the Gospel of Matthew, right before Jesus' ascension into heaven. And I might add that that is a commission that also extends to us today, that we are called to be disciples and then to share God's message with all those we encounter in our own lives. The ascension is the event where Jesus ascends into heaven, and he is not deserting his disciples. He's not deserting his bride, the church. Jesus is taking his throne at the right hand of God the Father in heaven. And Jesus has proclaimed the kingdom of heaven, which we will take a look at as we move forward through his teachings and his stories and his miracles. And now he is taking his seat, his throne, to rule over that kingdom. And he says to his disciples, as he says to us, I am with you always until the end of the age. So Jesus is not an absentee landlord where he's just deserted us, but he's with us in so many ways, in the Eucharist, in the most special of ways, and then also in the Spirit, which we will see during the event of Pentecost. He sends his Holy Spirit to not only found his church, but to move his church into the world to go and make disciples, sharing his message of love and salvation. And finally, I think it's important to note a couple of passages here from letters of St. Paul that really highlight what this means really for us today. So just something to think about as we ponder the resurrection. The first one being from Romans, where St. Paul is saying, do you not know that the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you and lives in me? I think that's a powerful point to ponder and meditate upon, that this same Spirit, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, lives inside each and every one of us. And that connects to this other passage where St. Paul is saying that we are temples of God, that the Holy Spirit of God dwells in each and every one of us. And that's really powerful to think about. It's miraculous, and hopefully it's something that we can really own and really delve into that mystery, and to know that God is nearer to us than we are to ourselves, and that he's with us always, and that we can talk to him at any moment throughout the day, and that he hears us.